Hello, I'm Lighthouse Counsel Senior Consultant Harry Chapman, broadcasting from our office in Franklin, Tennessee. Welcome to our Giving USA 2024 briefing. Giving USA is the longest running and most comprehensive report on the sources and uses of charitable giving in America. It's published by the Giving USA Foundation, a public service initiative of the Giving Institute, of which Lighthouse Counsel is a proud member firm. Today, you'll hear about the recently released Giving USA 2024 report and critical insights on current economic developments and donor trends. Providing today's briefing is Lighthouse Counsel Senior Consultant Dr. Lilya Wagner. Lilya has been one of the nonprofit sector's leading authors, speakers, trainers, coaches, and practitioners for over 3 decades. As Associate Director for Public Service and Director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute at the Indiana University Lilly School of Philanthropy, she oversaw curriculum and preparation for the fundraising school. An award-winning author, editor, and columnist, Lilya has written 16 books. Following will be a panel discussion with leading experts on philanthropy, moderated by Lighthouse Counsel's John O'Kane. And now for an overview of Giving USA 2024, Dr. Lilya Wagner.
Greetings. This is Lilya Wagner. I'm a consultant with Lighthouse Counsel, and I'm privileged today to share information with you about a very significant research study that has much indication and implication for how we do our practice of fundraising. Giving USA has been a research study that I have personally used both as a practitioner and as a consultant for many years because it guides my practice. It helps me know what I should do, how I adjust to circumstances, what are the best ways to go about getting support for my nonprofit. So today, I will walk you through a few of the highlights of this very important research study, the Annual Report on Philanthropy for the year 2023, Giving USA 2024. I would like to indicate that you could go to givingusa.org where you can have some free materials, including some infographics. So what we will cover briefly today is what is Giving USA? What are the contributions in 2023, both by source and who got this funding? What are the changes for the last 2 years? We know that we've been through some uncommonly turbulent times. How has this affected our philanthropic view of the United States? Then what are the trends? And also, what are some of the takeaways for us as practitioners? So in these brief moments, let's take a look at this very significant study. And I also want to thank and acknowledge the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, through which this report is prepared, and they have generously allowed us to use it for the clients of Lighthouse Counsel. Giving USA is the longest running annual report on U.S. charitable giving. I myself, in my practice, started looking at this quite a few years ago, and it was most valuable in helping me understand the broader perspective and how to bring the implications down to where I was working, to what was significant for me. So one thing that we will find in this is what are the sources of giving and who gets these funds? How are these funds that generous people in the United States are giving? How are these used? How are they distributed in our nonprofit sector? I do want to add that in the United States, we are so fortunate to have an active and large nonprofit sector. Having worked in probably about 100 countries as a consultant and trainer, I have seen how other countries have built up their nonprofit sector. We can look back at our roots and be grateful that we have many organizations under this rubric of nonprofit that help support our communities, our culture, our societies, and make us a great nation. It's published by Giving USA Foundation, and it began in 1956 by an organization that was the American Association of Fundraising Counsel. Now it's the Giving Institute. And we certainly thank those contributors who have made this significant study possible. So let's first start by looking to see, where do the contributions come from? Individuals are the largest giving group. And for as long as I have been tracking this, in my long experience both as a practitioner and as a consultant, individuals are the ones that are supporting our nonprofit organizations, which of course is not to discount at all the role that foundations play in supporting our organizations. Bequests, which are 8% of the total, of course, come from individuals, but they're a separate entity because of the very nature of planned giving. And then corporate giving. And when we look at some of these sources of where this money comes from, let's also take a look at where this money goes. This, perhaps for me, has been one of the most interesting aspects of this research because of how it has shifted over time and how our organizations are funded so they can help our communities and our citizens. The largest chunk of the money has gone to religion, 24%. However, there's an interesting perspective that we can share. When I first started looking at these figures, religion received approximately 50% of every dollar. Now, this is an interesting change because I'm sure that most of you have noticed that there's quite a bit of information circulating about how unchurched the United States has become. We also know the implications of that because as we look at the research and what motivates people's giving, religion is a significant factor that urges people to be generous. So when we look at this figure and see how much it has dropped just in my years of experience, we have to consider what are some of the factors that are affecting this. For example, even though, as I already mentioned, people have become unchurched, we can still see that giving by individuals is continuing with some variation that we'll address shortly. That means that people are perhaps giving to other organizations that serve maybe some of the same purposes as religion has. So we have to consider some of these changes, especially, and I repeat, as we look at the list of what motivates donors, given some variation, of course, depending on what kind of organization we are, but religion does affect giving. So we have to consider that when we do our fundraising and carry out our fundraising programs. Then we look at the next two, which are human services and education. I recall in years past that education and health would jockey for the second place, given the enormous changes in how healthcare is carried out. We can see that human services and education have become of paramount importance in the minds of our donors. This is, of course, a good trend because we can see that human needs are frequently met, and the fact that education is getting good support is one of the factors that builds us up as a nation. I mentioned already that I have much global experience, and I can name a number of countries where my contact persons have said to me, we've really got to build up our education system. That's what's going to make us a successful country, successful, of course, being very individual. So I think we are fortunate that in the United States that we support education as well as people who have various needs, that we do provide our resources for these organizations. Then looking at some of the other areas where our donors are generous, you can see by declining percentages that gifts to grant-making foundations is quite visible. Public society benefit, then healthcare. International affairs, I have watched with interest, of course, since I have worked globally, and I myself am a refugee and immigrant. So I'm very grateful to America's nonprofit sector that made my life here possible and my success in this life possible. International affairs, of course, people give to where they have more connection. Proximity is important. And international affairs also has maintained its position in about the 5% because more and more countries are carrying out their own fundraising programs. I myself have been part of that movement and helping with training and consulting in a number of countries, and been so gratified to see how generosity has been formalized and is taking shape in order to build up their societies and countries. Arts, culture, and humanities, environment, and then giving to individuals. These are all the factors that we can look at the whole picture of where is our funding going. So to continue, let's look at a few of the changes. First of all, looking at 2021 and 2022 and 2022 and 2023, looking at these changes in giving. First, in current dollars, we can see that in current dollars, some organizations have gone down, some organizations have gone up. This is sometimes an area that fluctuates quite a bit, and shortly we'll look at a graph that will show the ups and downs. I think the good news is that Americans continue to support their nonprofit organizations. Now, if we look at the effect of inflation, which we do have to, because our organizations that carry out the services, whether education or health or arts, they are also affected by inflation. So when we look at these inflation-adjusted dollars, we can see it's quite a different picture. Nevertheless, if we look at this graph, inflation-adjusted dollars in recent years, we can see there have been some ups and downs. I can recall some of these eras myself, especially in 2008 when some of nonprofit organizations were struggling. While they were very valuable to their communities and meeting needs, some of them definitely were struggling because of the inflation-adjusted income. But in general, we can see that in spite of some dips, there has been an increasing giving, especially as we look at, for example, 2017, 2018. And then we all know we had some turbulent years with the pandemic that certainly brought about some changes in how people choose to give and what they choose to give to and how they choose to give. One thing, as an aside, that has interested me greatly is how people sometimes choose to give directly. Maybe they'll even take food to a food bank. Maybe they will actually get involved in more ways and more direct contact with the needs. In my area, I still see cars lined up by several churches that are giving away free food. So sometimes out of our adversity comes some positive factors that have also affected our philanthropic action and our giving. So let's take a look now quickly at some of these factors, how inflation has affected, first, the giving, the groups that are giving, individuals, foundations, bequests, and corporations. And then we'll look at how this inflation factor has affected the recipients, such as religion and health. If you look at giving by individuals, you can see that the inflation factor is certainly significant. Giving by individuals, an estimated $374.40 billion, grew 1.6% in 2023. Then, if we look at adjustment for inflation, there was the decline of 2.4%. You might look at this and say, that's not critical. That's not a major factor. Maybe we can make up for it in other ways. But we do need to consider this as one of the factors that impacts our giving and our receiving of the funds so that we can provide the services that our organizations promise. Looking at it, giving by foundations, this grew 1.7% to an estimated $103.53 billion, a decline of 2.3% adjusted for inflation. Bequests, of course, come from individuals, and I have seen these grow over time, which I think is a very positive factor because it's a tool that has mutual benefit. And it was an estimated $42.68 billion, grew by 4.8%, and has remained relatively flat if you adjust it for inflation. Now, giving by corporations, we do have to consider that this includes several kinds of giving, such as in-kind contributions, grants, gifts made by corporate foundations. So the picture is a little bit broader here. Giving by corporations increased 3%, totaling $36.55 billion, a decline of 1.1% as we adjust for inflation. So as we look at these factors and we look at how they're adjusted for various factors in our environment, we can consider these factors as they affect our fundraising practice. And it is very important, especially to consider that our largest sources of income are from individuals. Sometimes as a practitioner, I've had a hard time explaining this to my boards, to people who are related and managing my organization. They say, business is where the money is, go get it. We need to remember that our support comes from individuals. Of course, we look at the other sources too, but let's not negate this very important factor. If you look at this over a 40-year period, it's a very interesting set of figures because they have all hovered around the 2%. Individual giving as a share of disposable personal income. I find this to be very interesting and very heartening. If we look at how various groups give, the wealthy, of course, have certain ways of preferring to give, but sometimes I'm afraid we ignore people in the lower strata of our economic picture. And yet people like to be involved when they know that they make a difference. And I'm very heartened to see this particular factor where it's hovered around 2% as a share of our individual personal income. So if we look at this same criteria over a 40-year period on inflation-adjusted dollars and current dollars, I'm not going to read all these figures to you, but you can look at the trends. The gold line is the inflation-adjusted dollars. The broken line is the current dollars. And I think there are two very interesting factors to notice. One, of course, is the flow of the lines. And one is that in spite of some dips, some little changes, our giving continues. And I find that very heartening, having myself, as I mentioned already, been a recipient of the generosity of people when I came to America as a refugee kid. Giving to religion, you can see the trends there. Giving to education, which, having been a college professor, I'm very heartened to see this continue, that education is a significant factor in the minds of our donors in the United States. Human services, having been a recipient myself many, many years ago of human services, I certainly have a heart for this. And I'm really, really glad to see how this has grown since 1983. Giving to foundations has been an interesting trend because it formalizes more giving. Sometimes it makes giving easier for a donor. I've had several mention that to me. Then giving to public society benefit is also part of what builds up our communities, looking at the real dollars as well as the inflation-adjusted dollars. Then looking at health, arts and culture. Arts and culture have seen more dips or a little bit of a roller coaster ride than some of the others. And I think I can understand a little of that, even though I'm a musician. I can understand that people say it's more important to feed the hungry than to listen to a concert. Now, we could have all sorts of interesting arguments and stop right there, but at least it's a little bit understandable on why some of these little dips occur in this area. International affairs tends to, of course, be affected by what's going on in many areas of the world and what is our tie to that area. How important is that area to us as U.S. citizens, as U.S. donors? Then environment and animals, again, because I love animals. I like to see that the trend has been going up. And then the final factor that I want to look at with you before I look at some of the application factors of how do we use this information. I have been interested to continue to see the growth in our nonprofit organizations. I know sometimes people say we're getting too many, we're confusing the donors. I like to look at it in terms of how are our nonprofit organizations meeting so many societal needs. We've shifted in some areas. During our pandemic, there was a lot of emphasis on providing food. I saw that in my own area where I live. And some other factors have been important as far as setting up ways for people to think and act. There's an organization near me that helps people prepare for work, even including the right kind of clothes to wear for an interview, how to handle an interview, where to find the jobs. So how our nonprofit organizations have grown, to me, is very heartening because it shows that increasingly, and look at the numbers, increasingly, we are meeting people's needs everywhere from listening to music to getting food. So let's look at a few factors that are significant on how we apply this information. Information just standing by itself is not as valuable as information that we understand. It is good research, it is solid, it is based on facts, and then it is up to us to know how to use it. So what are some of the implications that we might look at? First of all, there has been a trend in fewer donors contributing larger gifts. I know for a while I was actually a little bit concerned when organizations would ask for my advice and help, and they were focusing on the big donors, as they would put it. Let's not forget that sometimes big donors come from the smaller gifts given over time. Let's not deprive people on all economic strata of the value of being generous. In fact, I just want to interject something interesting here since we're looking at individual donors for a few minutes, is the fact that there is considerable research that people who are generous, they benefit from it themselves. People who are generous, they live longer, they're happier, they're healthier, and there is quite a bit of research that has been done in the last couple of decades on this factor. So even though we greatly appreciate our larger donors as they contribute the gifts and how this helps us with our carrying out our services, let's not forget to make it available to invite all people from economic strata, which is important. Donor retention has received quite a bit of attention, and it is a very significant fact. Sometimes when I give to an organization, it seems like they thank me. Sometimes they even don't. And then that's it. Well, let's think about what keeps a person interested, involved, giving. And including in that, we have to consider donor motivations. Why do people give? There has been quite a bit of research done on this. Boston College had a center that specialized in looking at what are some of the donor motivations, but it helps us understand in general what motivates people, but also what are some of the factors for our particular donors, what would motivate them. And that leads us to engaging and developing relationships with our donors. Let's not forget, as we think about the fact that the largest segment, the largest percentage of every dollar comes from individuals, let's not forget that if we engage them, we keep the relationship going, making it personal, making it appropriate for both the organization and the donor, that this will be one of the factors that's going to keep the giving going by the largest segment of our donor pool. And we might also remember that we have to use a variety of tools. These have certainly expanded in my time in this profession with the addition of social media, but we've also put a lot more emphasis on more personal approaches, more storytelling, more accountability factors. And let's never forget that people will give to outcomes, not necessarily because you have a need. What is this money going to do? So as we look at some of the implications of giving by individuals, let's remember these factors so that we can keep this generosity alive in the hearts of Americans. In foundations, there was record level asset acquirement by foundations in 2023, which of course bodes well for us as we ask for donations from foundations. But another factor we want to think about is how our businesses in our community can also be supportive in a variety of ways, which we need to understand. I've heard criticism over all the years that I've been in this profession that businesses should be giving more. I'm afraid sometimes we overlook some of the factors that are generosity indicators on the part of that sector. And finally, a comment about bequests. This is something that is of mutual benefit both to the donor as well as the organization. Many countries do not have this kind of a tool, and it is very valuable to understand how this works and why it is beneficial. Certain population groups, since diversity in philanthropy has been an area of mine, both research and writing about it and living it. There are certain viewpoints about this, so this is perhaps a tool that can be very valuable for us to continue to develop further. This concludes my brief summary of Giving USA. I want to once again thank the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy for allowing us to share the information of Giving USA for 2023. And to understand, I appreciate especially the explanations that come along with this information. I would encourage you to look up givingusa.org and see what kind of information you can glean from there for your own benefit. Thank you again for listening and watching. I'm Lilya Wagner, and I'm very happy to have shared this excellent information with you. My best wishes to each of you.
Thank you, Lilya, for that excellent summary of this year's Giving USA report. Now to share insights into what is happening in the nonprofit sector across the country, Lighthouse Counsel's John O'Kane will be joined by a stellar panel of nonprofit leaders. Over more than 5 decades, John has worked with hundreds of nonprofit organizations as a staff member, executive director, consultant, volunteer, board member, and professor. John was a distinguished adjunct professor of practice at the Georgia State University Andrew Young School of Policy Studies Department of Public Management and Policy. We are honored to have John on council with Lighthouse Counsel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wagner, for that excellent presentation of the overview of the 2024 Giving USA report. There's a lot of information in there, and we are now going to have a distinguished panel with a variety of views from different nonprofit organizations, I might add, looking at how this information relates specifically to them. So do stay tuned. I'm sure you're going to hear some things that will be relevant, important, and things that you can take away for your independent school, university, nonprofit organization, health and human service organization. Enjoy, and thank you very much for listening. Welcome to this analysis of the 2024 Giving USA report, one that comes out every year, but one that has some fascinating findings this year. And we have a wonderful opportunity to talk about it with a very, very distinguished panel. And I mean that in a real sense. I do want to just introduce them, and then we're going to jump right into it. I might just add that my name is John O'Kane. I have spent over 50 years, more than 50 years in the nonprofit sector. I taught for 31 years at Georgia State University as a professor of practice and coordinator of the nonprofit studies program. I also worked for 25 years with the Atlanta fundraising firm Cox Curry and Associates, and in executive director roles with several health associations. So I've seen it all along. In fact, my first distinguished role in the sector was as an executive secretary of the Mental Hygiene Association in Butler County, Ohio. And it was me. It was nobody else. It was just me. So I've seen it all, and I'm sure the folks that are with us have seen a lot of that too. But let me go ahead and just introduce who is with us on the panel, and then we're going to jump right into it. I want to introduce Lauren Koontz, who is currently the president and CEO of the Greater Atlanta YMCA, a friend and also a former colleague. So wonderful to have you with us, Lauren.
Thank you, John.
Juan McGruder, who is the senior, I think that's correct. Well, let me make sure I have the title correct. Yep. Is the senior vice president at Meharry Medical College in Nashville. We're happy to have you with us, and we go back with Juan in Atlanta over many years, several of us. Angela Naples is the head of school at the Atlanta Academy in Roswell, Georgia. And not only the head, but also the founder. She may be able to speak to us about some of that. And then lastly is Danny Herron, who is the president and CEO of the Habitat of Greater Nashville, where he has been in that role for 14 years and has some interesting career before that, which I'll talk about as we go into this. So I wanted to kick this off by just sort of a top of the mind question, and that is, as you look at the findings that have come out from the Giving USA, and they're sort of scripted. They come out every year, kind of with kind of the same format. But I wanted to ask each of you to pick just one thing that jumped out at you that related to specifically to your nonprofit organization or the nonprofit area in which your organization is working. And I'm going to start off with Lauren. And I do want to just acknowledge that Lauren is the first woman to be executive of the Greater Atlanta YMCA. She's been in that role for a little over 5 years, and before that, worked as 7 years as the director of development, or by whatever the official term was there. Significance of that was the ability to move, I think, from a fundraising position into a major CEO position. And there were lots of us on the sidelines cheering for her, and we're still cheering for her. But prior to that, she also worked at Mount Vernon Presbyterian School and Independence School, and with me at Cox Curry and Associates for a number of years, and some other experience along the way. So we're so excited, Lauren, to have you with us. But what was your main takeaway, please?
Well, it really was about individual giving and kind of both sides of that coin. What jumped out to me was that donors contributing less than $500 were responsible for almost 80% of the overall decrease of individual donors. And then on the flip side of that, the strongest growth to grant-making organizations was giving to foundations and to public society benefit organizations like national donor advised funds. And to me, it really, really underscores the fact that most of the individual giving is being driven by those that are mega wealthy donors. And it's getting harder and harder to really find and cultivate those smaller individual donors. And it really ends up not only impacting the amount of funding that you're receiving, but how you structure your entire development department to really focus on much larger donors. And I think that's good in some ways, but in some ways you're not really then taking the time to really do that grassroots cultivation and bring people along, because the pressure to go out and raise the money is so strong that you're going to gravitate your approach, your staffing models, your resources to really, really focusing on these mega donors.
Yes, excellent point. And I don't think this was mentioned in Giving USA, but I think it's accurate. If you remember, there was a time several years ago when even if you were not itemizing your deductions, you could still take a deduction for your charitable contributions. That has ended, and I think that probably benefited, Lauren, the group that you're talking about, most likely to give less than $500. And there's been some movement. I think the Association of Fundraising Professionals is pushing to return that. Well, thank you very much. Let me go to Juan. And as I mentioned, Juan is the senior vice president at Meharry Medical College, where he is a member of the president's executive cabinet. He has held several vice president and advancement positions at universities. I believe Oglethorpe, Georgia Tech, Clark Atlanta, and also was a senior vice president and chief development at Junior Achievement. Juan is overeducated. He has a PhD degree, has a couple of master's degrees. He has some certificates and a baccalaureate, but having worked in the university system, Juan, I know we need that to survive. So I applaud you for that. So let me ask you, please, to your biggest takeaway.
Well, let me say really quickly, John, it's just a pleasure to connect with you and Lauren in particular, in addition to the other panelists. But I've enjoyed for years learning about this particular port. In my AFP days after 25 years in Atlanta, just enjoyed you serving and giving us sort of a lesson. So when it comes to my educational training, trust me, I am over-educated as a result of hearing from you on an annual basis about these data that are related to this. So Good to be with you. But, I am, having been in Atlanta for the last 25 years, I've only been at Meharry Medical College for just under a year now. But I tell you, it's an academic health science center, which has a hospital and, very similar to our Grady in Atlanta or Ben Taub in Houston, serves the indigent. And, as an academic health science center, serving that population, Meharry has really been, benefiting greatly in a lot of ways in showcasing its strengths through the COVID pandemic, if you will. And I think that when I look at these Giving USA data as of this year, it's comforting to know that corporations in particular, but also foundations or individuals through donor advised funds are still maintaining. I agree with Lauren in that, the great majority of our funding is coming from high-end donors. But I'm also pleased to know that there are, thousands and thousands of donors as a result of the healthcare pandemic that are giving to Meharry at smaller levels. So I'm very pleased with that as well. But the trend is going in the other direction. I would agree that the way that our development operation is being set up, I've reorganized our organizational chart due to very much to respond to what Lauren talked about, that the Giving USA data is saying that the wealthy are giving more. Certainly has a lot to do with the S&P 500 and all the results that are coming from that. As long as it's doing well, I think corporations will continue to give at higher levels. Even with a dip here and there, I think their commitment to the healthcare industry really helps Meharry benefit. Nashville in particular is one of those places. It's one of the fastest growing cities in the country. I think it has been touted as a healthcare capital in the United States. So you have big companies like HCA, Oracle just moved here and has a headquarters. And so I think, the data aligns with a lot of the activity that's happening at Meharry and the opportunity as well. And so the corporations that we're engaging with partnerships and things like that are consistent again with the data that's happening with Giving USA. And so I think also volunteerism. I mean, volunteerism is really rising in a lot of ways post-pandemic. And I think that's helping quite a bit too in the industry that I serve in the healthcare industry.
Thank you, Juan. Appreciate that. We'll come back and drill down on your comments as we move ahead. I want to introduce Angela Naples, who I mentioned before is the founder and the head of school at the Atlanta Academy. Angela actually started out with the school, I believe, kindergarten through 5th grade, and she expanded it to PK2 all the way up through 8th grade. And it's interesting because we moved from a larger university health center to a smaller independent school. And we know there are tons of those independent schools that are out there trying to make it. Angela has a background in education. She has a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degree in education. She has been active with the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools and the Georgia Independent School Association, as well as with other organizations in the community. So we're very honored to have you comment, Angela, on what you saw as the biggest takeaway.
Thank you. And thank you, John, for having me. And it's a pleasure to be on a panel with all of you who are so experienced and knowledgeable in the area. And we have a lot of the same struggles, even though we're very different entities. But, there are differences. I do think the main thing that hit me was the fact that we're all kind of feeling it on whether you're a small independent school or a larger corporation or nonprofit. It is hitting all of us. I think inflation not only hit the ability for people to give and donate, but just to make tuition. And with that, it affected our financial assistance, and we were having to give more to those who need that supplement to help with the tuition payments. So you have to get creative with your budgeting, as well as, I'll piggyback on what Lauren and Juan were saying, your development directors have to take or stop and refigure how you want to proceed with raising money, because the whole scheme, the whole picture has changed. We have found some creative ways to raise money and to operate. But you do have to pay close attention. You do have to figure out where your funds are coming from. They are not coming from the smaller families anymore. It is the bigger foundations that we have to depend on, the mega donors. And I do feel that taking a whole look, we look at education all the time and how we need to change our approach and how we train our teachers. I think it's time for us to take a new look at our development initiatives and see what we can do to accommodate the new picture out there and giving.
Angela, in the warm-up, you made a very interesting comment, and that is that you try to run your school based on tuition and not on your money that is donated or your charitable money. Would you comment on that? I thought that was very interesting.
Absolutely. I started this several years ago when I started to see a trend in the ability to raise money. Like our annual fund was slowly trickling down. And then, of course, when you have a capital campaign, the annual fund always suffers a little bit because, people can't always give to both. But I was just tired of trying to, count on that extra money coming in. So I set the budget to where all tuition covers operations totally. And then anything we can raise for annual fund, we picked a certain topic and parents were more likely to give. Last year, our annual fund was geared toward security of the school. We wanted to enhance our security system. We blew past our goal of what we needed to, new cameras, the film on the windows, more computers to manage the cameras, security gates and things like that. It was so much easier to raise that than to say we need to raise money to make up for the difference of the shortfall of tuition. This year, our focus is enhancing our technology and STEAM programs. And we already haven't even started the annual fund. We already having parents very interested in what are you thinking about and waiting to see what it's all about so that they're very interested in giving to these things. So raising their interest and their excitement over the extra and knowing that their tuition dollars are going to what they're paying for is very tricky. You really have to be have a good team of finance directors and manage your money wisely. But I found that it is much easier to manage than to try and depend on that money coming in.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
We
for
also
sharing.
invested in some bonds, which yielded some things. So that helps for roof repairs and air conditioner units and things like that.
Very good. Very good. And then last but certainly not least, Danny Herron, who is president and CEO of the Habitat for Humanity of Greater Nashville, as I mentioned, where he's been for 14 years. So he's seen a number of that, but he hasn't come up through the traditional way of maybe the rest of us on the panel. He actually has a background in banking and finance, in real estate management, construction and development, and also, I think, an interest over time of working with faith-based organizations, which is why he wound up in the chair where he is now. So, Danny, you're kind of the last person on this relay. So tell us what you saw as the biggest takeaway.
Well, I'll focus really on what impacted Habitat for Humanity and was consistent. And that is, it talks about corporate giving, as even though it's a smaller percentage of the pie, it is a growing sector. And we find that to be very true. And we focus on that because what we find, and we have continued to find, especially through the pandemic and coming out of the pandemic, our corporate staff and employees don't want to just write a check. They want to participate. They want to be involved. They want to be engaged. And more companies, small and mid-sized companies, are partnering with nonprofits like Habitat for Humanity. So they're not only getting a brand alignment with that kind of philanthropic effort, but they're also getting employee benefit and retention by engaging their employees in the community through the support, through their financial support of operations like Habitat for Humanity, where volunteers come out on the build site. The other thing is that not only the community support, the employers are then giving days off and rewarding days off, even sometimes matching days off for those who spend a day during the week building. So we've had to change some of our operations. We used to build mainly on weekends. We've done more and more weekday builds because more and more corporations are allowing their employees to take the day off. So, it's forced us to also change because it is a growing sector we can do by partnering, providing value to the corporation for those things, brand engagement, employee engagement and empowerment, and also enhancing retention. But, we've had to become better at what I call just plain operations and hospitality. We always talk about the Disney model. We never have a broken ride. So when you're coming out, we're like baseball too. We don't have a rain delay. We're coming out there building because we've made a commitment to somebody, a corporation, to send their staff out or their employees out to come out today. So we have tents set up. We have, food, meals, restrooms, all that. But that engagement has allowed us to see continued growth in corporate giving. And that is consistent. I think what the Giving USA today is saying is, even though, again, it's a smaller piece of the pie, it is a growing piece. And it is not one just where they write checks. It is one where they want their staff engaged. They want their brand engaged in the community, showing. And we always talk about, we have photographers out there every day when people are volunteering. It's the Flume Zoom experience that you get at Disney World, is the moment where you're out there swinging a hammer with a hard hat on, with a T-shirt, man, and you're building team camaraderie, but you're also getting a memorable experience working with a family that you might have never known, to see how you have helped them and made a difference in the community. It's that barn raising moment of community building that's very special. So that's what I guess my focus has been. A lot of is that brand and alignment with engaging those corporations to feel that they're getting partnership value for the money that they're giving, that they're not just being a giver, but they're being a partner with us where they are getting a value add back to their organization. And we believe we can continue growing that to help support our ministry. And ultimately, we have to, as Juan knows by just coming to Nashville, our housing costs have gone up 150% in the 14 years I've been here. 150%. A house that we sold for $120,000 today is now costing $275,000. It's that much of a difference in Nashville. So we've had to look at other ways to generate that additional revenue.
Great. Well, thank you, Danny. I'd be a little bit remiss, I guess, if I didn't mention the bottom line for the Giving USA, which is, there's been a total of little over $557 million or billion dollars, contributed. And while that is a 1.9% increase, when adjusted for inflation, it's a 2.1% decrease. And I think what I might want to comment on is the inflation not only affects the individual donors we were talking about. And remember, in the study, when it looks over, I think it looked over a 20-year period. In 1983, 82% of all giving was from individuals. In 2024, it was down to 67%. So there's really two things here. But the one thing, inflation is hitting the nonprofits. It's really hurting them. So if you can't raise that, your costs are going up. You've got to pay for them in some way. If the individuals are going down, it does force us, as you mentioned, to focus more on the wealthier donors and to look to the foundations and the corporations. But I wonder if you all might maybe just comment on how your organization is dealing with the inflationary pressures of running your shops. And anybody can jump in.
I can start.
If you mind, I'll quickly start off real quickly just to say, we're trying to generate more earned income. We've run over 100,000 square feet of retail stores called our restores. Atlanta has a great restore and great habitat. So to say, we're grossing over about $3.5 million of gifting kind products being given to Habitat that we turn around and sell with about a 30% margin to generate well over $1 million a year. And we've just added another 40,000 square foot store. So I just quickly to say, we're trying to increase our earned income, which donors like to see, and has helped offset some of that inflation.
Yeah, very good, Lauren. And then Juan.
I absolutely agree. I mean, if in all of the scenarios that we're all, where we work and the organizations we're representing, all of them have a level of earned revenue, either through tuition and services provided. And so that is, a great way to continue to hedge philanthropic donations and as you kind of rethink your strategy. So yes, definitely juicing earned revenue is really important. For those that do not have earned revenue and are, one gala away from hitting their budget, that's a really tough position to be in. And not everybody has the luxury that the four of us do to have earned revenue. I think one of the things that I've noticed, and even just looking way back, it feels like, kind of the dawn of philanthropy in the US. It was kind of the give to the big organizations like a United Way, and they know best how to spend your money. And then, 100 years later, it's hyper focused. We're going to give you $10 online, and we want to know within 20 minutes what you've done with it. And if you tell us, then maybe we'll circle back with a larger gift. But I do think it is forcing us to think differently about how, and again, this is to Angela's point earlier, how you create a case for support that is super specific, and the ability to drive interest around, not really pushing the general support message. I think that has just gotten so lost. For us at the Y, our members, in the same way that parents of students are thinking, well, I pay a membership to be a part of this organization. Why should I make a gift? And really having to be hyper specific around what those dollars will do. For us, for instance, we're starting some very specific giving circles. That's not something we've done at the Y. We are launching, actually have already launched, and it's becoming very successful, an African American Circle of Giving for our YMCA that is highly focused on communities of color and the programs that we have that are specifically working within communities of color. And we'll be doing the same thing with the women's giving circle. And while giving circles may seem old school, I think in many ways it allows us to create kind of bifurcated messages to certain audiences to really try to create interest at an individual level around a very specific case for support. So that's one way that we're trying to get to audiences and articulate a very focused message that resonates with them versus a kind of peanut butter spread, just give and we'll figure out, what we're going to do with it.
Yeah, it's good comments. Juan, you were going to jump in there.
Yeah, of course, Lauren's comments just made me forget everything I was going to say. But I just love hearing her articulate her case. But part of the thing that I was thinking is that, here at Meharry, we've got a $200 million annual operating budget. It's vital for us as a higher education institution to diversify the revenue pie as much as possible. We know that most colleges and universities in America tend to be very tuition driven. So you think about, 70-80% of their annual operating budget, particularly, I'm speaking of the private ones, of course, the nonprofit ones, 70-80% or more in some cases is tuition based. But therefore, when a trend changes, or a policy changes, depending on your source of income for your students, if it's government related, for example, if a policy changes, a trend changes, it impacts you right away. And so no matter how much you try to increase your enrollment, right, as a result of trying to make sure that you have more revenue, things can change rather quickly, and they have for many institutions. And so diversifying our revenue pie is very, very important. And to the so that's where philanthropy becomes vital, right? That it's not, the tuition driven model is effective, but it's not sufficient enough, right? And so when I think about the Giving USA trends, I think part of the issue is a long-term view for a place like Meharry. We continue to work towards diversifying our revenue pie by getting, more research dollars and things like that might help a little bit with some of the administrative fees to be able to have unrestricted funds, if you will, to distribute. to keep the lights on, if you will, or keep people employed. But on the other side, with philanthropy, I think we've got to make sure that we're paying attention to the increasing or the rise of estate provisions and things like that, because it's a long-term game. We know that that is continues to be one of the fastest growing areas of sources of revenue when it comes to individuals. And so we are organizing, or at least I am, in terms of my team is organizing more to do more in that area. I was pleased to see at Meharry that it is a wonderful trend of having realized estate provisions on an annual basis, much of which is not unrestricted, which is great. Now you can't count on that, right? You don't plan for it, and you certainly don't fundraise for it in that respect. You not to realize, but the fact that if you can get people to contribute and use those vehicles that are tax benefit in a lot of ways, and the taxes have not really impacted that. The policies haven't impacted that source, that vehicle very much these days. And so we're concentrating on that more and more. So those are the two things that come to mind, is how do you diversify the revenue pie? As Angela said, really think more creatively. And so did Lauren. And also for me, how do you increase estate provisions in ways that are sustainable in the long run as well?
Yeah, thank you, Juan. Angela, I mean, for a smaller independent school, I would think that the inflationary cost of running the operation is a challenge. And you mentioned before that you really try to use the tuition to run the school, but that's got to be a tough balance these days.
It is, and I think Lauren might have mentioned you come up with some other ways to bring in revenue, your clubs and activities, your after-school care, we call them fundraisers, but we do like a casino night where we are doing some fun things and bringing in a little bit. Every couple of years we do a big gala, but it's like I said, it's all the extra money. But when you are looking at your curriculum, your teachers, and the bulk of everybody's tuition dollars goes to your faculty, hopefully, because we want to make sure that we pay them well and that we keep those good teachers and pay them what they're worth. It's the other things that you can be creative. You don't have to order mounds and mounds and mounds of workbooks anymore. But if you find a lot of waste out there in your operations at an elementary level. But you also know that some things are very necessary. And if you don't diversify your revenue pie, as Juan said, like I said, we were investing in bonds. We have our finance committee on our board doing a lot of great things with our finances. We have been able to pay off our loan ahead of time. So you have to have a strong team who knows what they're doing, knows what to watch for. And that's my secret sauce. I surround myself with talent like that. But yeah, there are a lot of avenues for different pockets of money coming in.
Very good, very good. You all didn't mention too much, but I want to talk about foundations, because similarly with the decrease in individual contributions, we've seen foundation giving go up from 6% in 1983 to 19%. Now, I think that's a little bit disingenuous because there's a lot of individual money in there as people have set up their own foundations or they've given to the different vehicles that they can give to. But I'm wondering if your strategy has changed in approaching foundations, because foundations have changed their strategies in giving to you. I mean, it used to be back in the old days, and I know the old days, but back in the old days, foundations were there for capital expense. That was almost exclusively it. Might as well not go to talk to them about anything else. They were the way that the nonprofit sector addressed capital. That slowly changed over time, and now it's an entirely different picture. We've even seen some incredible models where foundations are giving loans. They're wanting to give grants based on impact. So I'm wondering how each of you are kind of coping with foundations as a part of that diverse pie you each have stated is so important.
I'd like to
Yes,
share,
Angela. Yes.
I don't want to mention any specific foundation, but one that I talked to recently, and it's a beautiful idea. They want to give, and we have been on the recipient end and very blessed by their generosity. But now their model is looking toward, we're happy to give you money, but your program or whatever is that's not capital. How are you going to give back or pay it forward to the less fortunate in the community? How are you going to open up and use these dollars to serve others? And that makes you stop and think about your program altogether and what you can do with your current situation, and think outside the box. That's not how we're used to operating in a private school. We need the money to make this great and to help with this program that we have, but now you're kind of being encouraged strongly to think forward or think outside the box, use these dollars for the good so that it spreads. And that was very telling for me. I was like, whoa, I need to go back and think about how I'm going to make this happen, how I could be a part of this. And when you mentioned that about service, it made me think, I guess, that is where we're going. And that's not a bad thing, but it does make you think about, it's not going to be all about you and how you're going to use this money for your school. How are you going to make it a part of the community?
Great example. Others, how you're dealing with foundations?
Yeah, I will.
Lauren, I know that's a big piece of your pie.
It's a big piece of our pie. I think that foundations have become increasingly sophisticated. I think the work that happens nationally and regionally, where foundation leadership comes together and are discussing trends, even before the pandemic, you were seeing a lot of foundations going through a revisioning process, really rethinking their strategies, their focus areas, their priorities, how they would measure impact. And I think the pandemic really supercharged the idea of, I'm not just going to give you a capital gift, or I'm not just going to give you a gift for this new program, and I want you to figure out this new program, then I need you to figure out how to sustain it because we're not going to pay for it past 3 years. I think what they really began to see was this need for infrastructure and this need for innovation and this opportunity to come alongside and really be partners with organizations that were doing good work. And I think it really elevated a lot of foundations' understanding of what goes on kind of when you pull the curtain back. And that's something that I've always really, really tried to focus on in building relationships with foundation leadership, is that I'm never going to ask for money that I can't deliver on, but I'm also going to ask you to invest in our organization to try new things, because we're not going to be able to solve for the challenges you're asking us to solve for if we don't have some ability to take risk. There's nothing great that's ever built without a level of risk involved. And if that trust is given to you, then I also believe it's incumbent on us to be completely and totally transparent with our funding partners along the way to continue to build that trust, even if things don't go well. So I think that foundations are becoming increasingly sophisticated and increasingly connected to one another and learning from one another. But I also think the pandemic really, if there were any rocks under the waterline, when that waterline receded, we all kind of put our cards on the table, and it was time to really start having honest conversations, which I think really did go a long way towards foundations thinking a little bit differently about how we have to be sustainable organizations and what that takes.
And I think, Lauren, it also, you looked at more of a partnership with the foundation rather than the old day of, hey, we're trying to get this money out of their pockets. How do we do that? What do they want to hear? And part of that partnership has to be transparency, of course. Danny, obviously you must be dependent on foundations for a fair amount of your pie. I could be wrong. But how have you been dealing with that?
Oh, we have, and I would add, we have a layering in there too, the government fund agencies as well, but specifically on the foundations, we're learning how to layer funding on individual houses and things that we do. But you're talking about transparency. I would almost say competency too. One of the challenges with the foundations, there is money there, especially As Juan mentioned, we have a lot of healthcare here, and a lot of that money goes from the healthcare individuals who've made great wealth into foundations and made available for capital campaigns, things like that. The one thing, and that's all positive and something we're pursuing. The one thing I guess I would say as a former banker, I have a stronger staff, I believe, in my nonprofit than I did in the bank because of financial complexity and compliance. It's easy for me to sell and get one or two times to get a foundational support, but to comply with their standards and then layer that to match multiple foundations over one period of time takes real financial and accounting skills and transparency that if you don't comply, the money dries up very quickly. So that, of course, adds to your operational expense, but it is a necessity to be able to really pursue these foundations, which money is available from.
Good. We're almost approaching the end of our time, and Juan mentioned before state gifts or bequest, and we have seen that consistently in Giving USA grow a little bit. Juan mentioned how he approached that. I wonder, maybe just a quick minute or two from each of you, how you might be approaching that, if you are at all. Juan, do you want to maybe just make a restatement about kind of what your strategy is? Because I think you said you're going to be spending more time on that.
Yeah, and staffing up, to be quite honest, in terms of talent and manpower, if you will, or people power. The idea is to ensure that we're showcasing the opportunities to our constituencies in more clear ways. And I think that is important because a lot of the vehicles are very complex when it comes to bequests and state provisions, but some of them are quite simple and easy, and again, tax beneficiary kind of things for our constituents. So that to me is a growing opportunity. I mean, Meharry is approaching, as of 2026, 150 years. We'll be celebrating our sesquicentennial celebration. And the bottom line is that sustainability for organizations like ours is vital, especially as a historically Black institution. And although we're diversifying our revenue pie, when it comes to our individuals that experience us, whether it's a grateful patient, at one of our hospitals, or whether it's or one of our clinics, that is, our hospital and one of our clinics, or whether it's one of our, our alumni or friends, the idea of sustainability and showcasing the opportunity through those vehicles as a way to support Meharry is vital. And I think every organization should be thinking about that because we know, as you mentioned, we've seen that uptick year after year with the Giving USA data to nonprofits and individual giving.
Yeah. Other comments on the bequest as a part of your pie?
Well,
Lauren, go ahead.
I'll just jump in and say I worked at Emory University for a time in the early 2000s. And, what I really noticed there, and both working with you, John, at Cox Curry and Associates, was that universities and hospitals have typically been the best as it relates to both endowed gifts and bequests. And I think it's because there are the resources to really build a very comprehensive development team that can really focus in on so many different aspects. When you're a smaller, kind of scrappier nonprofit, that's not always the luxury that you have. And so I think there is recognition as we're seeing individual giving, especially at those lower levels, decrease, of how are we thinking differently for the future. And so we are hearing a lot more outside of the university and hospital space around bequests, around endowed gifts. And the reality is the organization is going to have to make investments in people and investments in the training for those people, because bequests and endowed gifts to me seem to, maybe not so much endowed gifts when you have major gift officers, but bequests seem to be that thing that are over on the side of the desk. And you always want to get to it. It's always there. I'm really going to focus more on it next year or in this next corner. But, money in hand is always trumps the, money for the future. And so I think you really have to think about having dedicated resources and a plan around resources to be able to do that if you want to get serious about bequests as a real tangible part of your fundraising that occurs year after year.
Great comment. Angela or Danny, any final comments on the request? Angela?
Yes, I think the sustainability is key, your program, what you're doing. And that's what you have to attain, that sustainability, to be around another, 50 years. And then to do that, your program has to be such that you are moving with the world. You have to come up with those brilliant things and those wonderful ideas to attract the attention of a donor or foundation that feels like, yeah, that sounds like a promising thing. That sounds like something I want to get into. You cannot just keep rolling along as a little elementary, or private independent school. For that sustainability, a lot goes into that. And I think, I can't remember who mentioned it, but hiring the key people. I always swear by that, to help you with those things, like especially in the financial arena and the development arena. You need to find a development director who is going to think forward and think about how things are now and not do things the way we've always done them. And I think it's some of the larger, more established schools, they probably can do things the way they've always done them, because they're established and they've got a huge endowment. But for those that don't have that, it's not impossible. You just have to be innovative and more creative and know what's out there and know where your competition is and know what the trend is.
Very good. Danny, you want to close us out with maybe a comment about states or West?
Well, I'm fortunate and I'm part of a international brand. So sometimes I'm the Forrest Gump of giving. We just get gifts because of the Habitat brand. So we're very fortunate that we are being more and more intentional about that and really trying to go to people. We have 5,000 volunteers a year. And you're right, the transactional giving is maybe a very small portion of our overall contributed income. But more and more, even younger people are willing to do something, as they set up their first will or something like that, to leave something behind. So we're making that as easy as possible through some technology and using that. So every time we have a volunteer, we have your typical donate now, but we also have a place where you can go to free will and you can get a free will established that would name, and obviously in that, we'd hope that you would name Habitat in that.
Very good, very good. This has just been a wonderful discussion. And anytime we talk about fundraising or gifts, it does all come down to relationships. And you all have been alluding to that, whether that's at an independent school or a 150-year-old historic Black medical university or the YMCA or even Habitat. The relationships are key. The transparency, Lauren mentioned that several times. I think that's very key. The transparency in those relationships, whether that's an individual or whether that's a foundation or whether that's somebody you're cultivating for a bequest. And all of that comes back to sort of sustainability. Are you as an organization going to be here tomorrow? But not only are you going to be here, but are you still going to be making a difference? And that's where we need to have that focus giving and demonstrate that we're really doing what relates to our mission and what needs to be done. With that, I just want to express my deepest appreciation to each of you, to Lauren, Angela, Juan, Danny. What a just an amazing panel that Jeff has put together. And on behalf of Jeff Jowdy and Lighthouse Counsel, thank you so much. And I hope that this will be viewed. It certainly needs to be viewed by some folks because there are some great kernels of truth and wisdom in here. Thank you all so much. Have a great day and also a great summer. I hope you get a little time off. Take care.
Thank you, John.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for all you guys are doing at Lighthouse. Thank you.
We hope that this Giving USA program inspires ideas and discussions about how nonprofit board members and staff can succeed in the current economic and philanthropic environment. Lighthouse Counsel partners with respected nonprofits to develop and implement strategies that increase mission awareness, organizational effectiveness, and philanthropic support. Our core services include fundraising, strategic planning, board development, and leadership development. Please take time today to follow Lighthouse Counsel on LinkedIn. We would love to hear from you. Please let us know if there is anything we can do to serve you. Our best wishes to you.